Good morning. Thank you for joining me on Sewing for Dolls. If you haven't been here before, my name is Deborah and I own Ooh La La Doll Boutique. Today we'll be working on the Pinafore for the Luminaria Countryside Girl Dress. So I've got all my pieces cut out. I've got the linings, the top of the bodice, my skirt, sleeves, cuffs, and ruffle. We're going to begin by taking our bodice front and sewing right sides together at the shoulder seams. So I've done a 1/4 inch seam on the shoulders and I've pressed that open, and I'm going to do the same with the lining. 1/4 inch seam and press them open. So I've stitched my shoulder seams on the lining 1/4 inch, press them open, and around the armholes I stitched just within 1/4 inch because I'm not going to sew them and the sleeves all down at once. I'm going to blind stitch the lining to the armholes when I'm finished. So for now we'll set that aside and move on to the sleeves. For the sleeves we're going to do 2 rows of gathering stitches on the bottom and 2 rows of gathering stitches around the top. Now I have my gathering stitches done, I'm ready to attach the cuff to the bottom of the sleeve. So I've got my center marked on my sleeve cuff. Just mark the center of my sleeve here. So there's the center of my sleeve. This is the wrong side. I'm going to take the right side and put it to the wrong side of my sleeve. And I prefer to sew it this way so that when you fold it over and over again, you'll be doing your top stitching on the top so you can see exactly where it is and it doesn't look messy. Sometimes it's hard to keep it even. So now I'm going to gather both of these so that they match the sleeve. Now we're ready to gather our sleeve. So take your top 2 threads and gather until it matches up with the cuff. Do the same thing with the other side and do a 1/4 inch seam. And do that with the other sleeve too. Now that we've got the cuff attached to the sleeve, we're going to pull out the gathers. You can trim a little bit of this off so that it's about 1/8 inch. Just makes the sleeve a little less thick. So now that we've got that trimmed, with the right side of the sleeve facing us, we're going to fold a cuff over 1/4 of an inch, then fold it over again, just a little above our stitch line, and top stitch that down. And we'll do the same on the other sleeve, and I'll be back to you once that's done. Now I have both sleeve cuffs finished. We're going to attach this to our back. So turn this in half and find the center. Match that up with the seam, right sides together. And match at the bottom of the sleeve. And pull together. And do that to the other side, and then do the same steps on your other sleeve. Now that both sleeves are pinned down and the gathers have been evenly spread around, I'm going to go and sew my sleeve in at 1/4 of an inch. And I'll be back once that's done. Now I have my sleeves in place, and it's time to do the lining. Before I do the lining though, I'm going to attach this ribbon right at the corners at the top. The pattern calls for eyelets or closed rings, and you just thread the ribbon through them, but I don't really like using or having to thread eyelets to get a dress on a doll, so I'm going to do it this way, and then it can just tie at the top, the pinafore. So when we attach our lining, it's right sides together, and we're going to match up the shoulder seams. Match up the fronts. Now we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam from the bottom left hand corner, or the bottom right hand corner, wherever you decide to start, along, around the neck, and back down the front. And I'll be back as soon as I finish that. Once you have that edge done, you can either clip or cut with pinking shears. I'm going to trim it down with some pinking shears. Just be careful not to go through your stitch line. I'm going to turn that to the inside. Now we're going to iron that and get ready to put our sides together. Once you have that edge pressed, it's time to sew up the sides. So I'm going to pin the other side the same way, and then I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam on both, and on my pinafore front I'm going to finish that edge on the serger. If you don't have a serger, you can use a zigzag. Now that the sides are finished, I'm just going to pull the end of my thread up here through the side stitches and trim it. When I sew my side seam and my sleeve, I start at the bottom of the side and come around. I find that makes this a little more even. Sometimes if you start here, your machine will slip and it makes your cuff uneven. Now that that's done, we're going to turn this right side out. Now our bodice is complete. We're going to move on to our skirt. So the first part of the skirt is to do the bottom ruffle. My fabric was only 40 inches wide and the ruffle is supposed to be 44 inches. So instead of just attaching 4 inches to the back, I've made my center one 22.5 inches. And then each side piece is 11.25. And together that will give me a strip that's 44 inches long. So I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam on each end to get my ruffle the length that I need it. And then I'm going to do 2 rows of stitching across the top, gathering stitches. And I'll be back once that's done. Now that I have my 2 rows of gathering, I've marked the center of my ruffle. I've marked the center back of my skirt and each side. And I marked the sides just by folding the front edge to the center back, and I stuck a pin there and the same on the other side. So now I'm going to attach my ruffle. The pattern tells you to make your gathers and then sew this onto, turn this up, and then sew this down, measuring all the way along. That's very time consuming, and I'm feeling kind of lazy today, and I really don't want to measure all that. So I'm going to attach my back, or my ruffle I should say, right sides together to the skirt. Match up the center point and the sides where I've already attached the 2 ruffle pieces together. By doing it this way, once my ruffle is all gathered, I can just turn it up and stitch it down. And before I do that though, I'm going to gather this, make sure that my ruffles are even, and I'll be back after to show you the next step. Now that I have my ruffles sewed to the skirt, wrong sides together, I'm going to press it so that it lies flat, down like that, so that that's smooth. Then I'm just going to top stitch it. First though, I'm going to finish this seam. It's not in the pattern, but I made a bunch of these dresses for the Sibley's, and I just found it a little bit messy, and that would poke out of the lace. So I'm going to finish it and so that it lays flatter. So I'll be back once that's done. So now I have that pressed with the seam pressed up on the front. I'm ready to attach my lace. I'm going to attach my lace about 1/8 of an inch from the top of the ruffle and just do a straight stitch right across. So I'll pin that down first and then sew it on. I ended up doing a tiny zigzag just so that I would catch the top of that ruffle. So that's all sewn down now. Now on each short end, I finished the edge with the serger while I was over at the sewing machine. We're going to turn that over 1/4 of an inch towards the front and turn it over again. And stitch that down. Now that I have my gathering stitches, I'm going to mark the center back by folding my skirt in half. And then I'm going to take one side and fold it towards the center and mark my side seam. And then do that on the other side. Now I need to mark the center back of my bodice. I'm just going to push these through the armhole so they don't get stitched in. Right sides together, match the center back of the skirt to the center back of the bodice. Match the side seam. And the front edge. Down. Now pull your gathering threads and evenly distribute your gathers until you're happy with them. And I'll be back once I get that done. I have my skirt all pinned on and my gathers evenly spread. So now I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam from there to the other side. Now that I've got the skirt attached, I'm going to turn my lining over 1/4 inch. And then line stitch across after I get it pinned down. When pinning the lining down, make sure that your seams match up. Otherwise it won't sit properly. So I'm going to go finish that and I'll be back once I have that sewn down. Now that we have our lining sewn along the waistband, we're going to move on to the sleeve. First thing we're going to do is clip around the curved edges. Once you've clipped all the way around, you're just going to tuck this under along your stay stitching. You can finger press it if you'd like, just to help hold it down. At this point, I like to put my needle through from the back side so that it stays under, the knot stays under my fabric. Once you've got that all turned around, you can pin it just to hold it in place. Back to the underarm. I'm just going to grab the fabric from the sleeve and just through my fabric. And I'm going to stay just under the stitching line on my sleeve. Back through my lining. Now that we're back at the underarm, I'm just going to slide it between the layers here and do a French knot. And then stick my needle back into the opening there and just slide it between the two fabrics. Pull it through. Snip. So from the outside we can't see it, the stitching anywhere. And the inside is nice and neat. Nothing for the doll's fingers to get caught on. So we'll do that to the other side and then we're done. Here's Sarah in her finished dress. Now we'll just have to make her bonnet and she'll be finished. Thank you for joining me today. Hope to see you on the next video.